I'm Manda Andrews, 28, and I thought the hardest part of bringing my daughter into this world would be labor itself. I was wrong. While I was in the delivery room, fighting through 18 hours of contractions, my parents drove to my apartment and sold my baby's crib, the one I'd saved for months to buy, the one I'd assembled with trembling hands at 7 months pregnant. They needed quick cash because my sister Emma wanted concert tickets to see her favorite band. "Your sister needs this more," my mother told me when I called from my hospital bed, still bleeding, still in shock. But what they didn't know was that I'd been recording every conversation, every cruel comment, every moment of favoritism for months. The truth about our family's twisted priorities was about to come to light, and the reckoning would be more devastating than they could ever imagine. The hospital bracelet around my wrist felt heavier than my sleeping daughter as I unlocked my apartment door 3 days later. Lily weighed barely 6 pounds, but she was everything to me. My reason for working 16-hour shifts at the diner, my motivation for saving every spare dollar, my future wrapped in a pink blanket, I'd imagined this moment so many times during my pregnancy. Walking through that door, carrying my baby to her nursery, placing her gently in the crib I'd assembled with such care. The white wooden crib with hearts carved into the headboard. It had taken me 4 months of double shifts to afford it, but I'd wanted something beautiful for my daughter, something that said she was loved and wanted. The empty corner where it should have been felt like a physical blow. I stood frozen in the doorway of what was supposed to be Lily's nursery, my arms trembling as I held her closer. The pale yellow walls I'd painted at 7 months pregnant still glowed softly in the afternoon light. The mobile I'd hung so carefully still turned slowly above nothing, but where her crib should have been, there was just empty space and the faint rectangular outline on the carpet where it had sat out. My legs gave out, and I sank into the rocking chair, the one piece of furniture they'd left behind, probably because it was too heavy to move quickly. Lily stirred in my arms, making those tiny newborn sounds that should have filled me with joy but now just reminded me of everything she'd been robbed of. I remembered the day I bought that crib. It was a Saturday in my 5th month, and I'd taken the bus to 3 different stores before finding one I could afford. The salesman had been kind, helping me arrange delivery for the following week. I'd stood in that store, one hand on my growing belly, imagining the day I'd bring my baby home. "She's going to love it," I'd whispered to myself, running my fingers along the smooth wooden rails. Now, as I sat in the empty nursery, I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. The call to my mother 3 days ago replayed in my mind like a nightmare on repeat. "Mom, where's Lily's crib?" I'd asked from my hospital bed, still connected to 4 lines, still bleeding, still recovering from the most difficult experience of my life. "Oh, honey, we had to sell it. Emma needed money for those concert tickets. You know how much this band means to her. She's been so depressed lately, and we thought you sold my baby's crib for concert tickets." "Don't be dramatic, Manda. It's just a crib. You can get another one when you're back on your feet. Your sister needed this more. Your sister needed this more." The words had echoed in my hospital room as I'd stared at the ceiling, my newborn daughter sleeping in the plastic hospital bassinet beside me. Even in my most vulnerable moment, even after bringing their granddaughter into the world, Emma's wants came before my baby's needs. Lily began to fuss, and I realized I had nowhere to put her down safely. No crib, no bassinet, nothing. I'd have to make do with a bedroom dresser drawer lined with blankets, a makeshift bed that broke my heart with its inadequacy as I settled her into the improvised sleeping space. Something hardened in my chest. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This was about my daughter, about the life she deserved, about breaking a cycle that had poisoned my family for too long. That night, while Lily slept in her makeshift drawer bed, I found myself pulling out the old photo albums from under my bed. The ones I hadn't looked at in years because they hurt too much. There we were, Emma and me as children. But you'd never know we were sisters from these pictures. In every single photograph, Emma was front and center, perfectly posed with a bright smile, while I lingered in the background or at the edge of the frame. Birthday parties where she got elaborate themed celebrations and I got a store-bought cake. Christmas mornings where her pile of presents towered over mine. Even candid family shots somehow managed to capture Emma in the best light while I appeared blurry or partially cut off. I ran my finger along a photo from Emma's 8th birthday, a princess-themed party with a bouncy castle, professional decorations, and 20 of her classmates. My own 8th birthday had been 3 months later, pizza at home with just family. When I'd asked why we couldn't have a party like Emma's, Mom had sighed and said we'd already spent too much on celebrations this year. The pattern was there in every album every year. Emma's achievements were magnified and celebrated. Mine were acknowledged with a brave good job before the conversation moved back to whatever Emma was doing. When Emma made honor roll, they took her out for a special dinner and bought her a new outfit. When I made honor roll 3 years in a row, they said they were proud, but that grades were just expected. I remembered the exact moment I realized I was invisible in my own family. I was 12, Emma was 9, and we were at her cousin's wedding. Emma had insisted on wearing her flower girl dress, even though she wasn't in the wedding party, and she'd spent the entire reception charming relatives and collecting compliments. I'd worn my nicest dress, a simple blue one I'd saved my allowance for, and had hoped. Grandma with her wheelchair all day dot at the end of the night, Aunt Sarah had pulled my parents aside. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I'd been returning from the bathroom when her voice carried across the hotel lobby. "That little Emma of yours is certainly spirited," she'd said, and I could hear the carefully controlled tone that meant she was trying to be diplomatic. "Oh, you know, Emma, she's always been our little star," Mom had replied with a laugh. "She just lights up every room she enters. And what about Manda?" Aunt Sarah had asked. "She was so helpful today, and she's grown into such a thoughtful young lady." There had been a pause, just a brief one, but long enough for my 12-year-old heart to register the hesitation. "Oh, Manda's. Well, she's more of our quiet one. Very responsible, of course, but Emma's always been the one with personality." I'd stood there in my blue dress, invisible even when someone was specifically asking about me. That night, I'd started a journal, not to document my feelings, but to document the differences in how my parents treated us. Even at 12, some part of me knew I'd need proof someday, thought the disparity had only grown worse as we got older. Emma's college was fully funded. I'd worked my way through community college with student loans I was still paying off. Emma's car was a graduation gift. I bought my used Honda with savings from my part-time job. Emma's apartment was subsidized by her parents. I'd been on my own since 18 and now even my daughter's basic needs came second to Emma's entertainment. Closed the photo album and reached for my phone. It was time to start documenting again, but this time, I wouldn't be the invisible 12-year-old recording slides in a diary. This time, I'd be strategic. This time, I'd gather evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The small, digital recorder I'd bought online arrived 2 days later. It was tiny enough to fit in my purse, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from across a room, and had enough memory to store hours of audio. As I tested it for the first time, Lily sleeping peacefully in her drawer bed nearby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control. They thought I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who would always just accept whatever scraps of attention and respect they threw my way. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. 2 weeks after Lily's birth, I was sorting through mail when I accidentally opened an envelope addressed to Emma. Inside were credit card statements, not just one, but 3 different cards, all with our parents listed as authorized users and primary account holders. The numbers made my stomach drop. Emma's monthly spending averaged $4,000. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, spa treatments, weekend trips, all funded by our parents while I was rationing formula and buying generic diapers with coupons. The concert tickets that had cost my daughter her crib, they were just one line item in a sea of frivolous purchases. I photographed every page before carefully resealing the envelope and leaving it where Emma would find it. My hands were shaking as I calculated the math. In the past year alone, our parents had spent over $48,000 on Emma's lifestyle. I knew this because I'd started tracking everything after the crib incident, every social media post showing new purchases, every casual mention of parents helping out, every time Emma appeared somewhere expensive without any visible means of paying for it. Meanwhile, I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so I could afford Lily's formula. The contrast became even starker when Emma visited the following week. She swept into my apartment wearing a designer dress I recognized from her Instagram price tag, probably more than my monthly rent-carrying shopping bags from expensive boutiques. "Oh my God, Manda, you look exhausted," she said, setting down her bags and barely glancing at Lily. "Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to have a baby you couldn't afford." I bit my tongue, remembering the recorder in my purse. Let her talk. I mean, I get that you wanted to play house or whatever, but Mom and Dad shouldn't have to bail you out just because you made poor choices. She was examining her manicured nails as she spoke, as if my financial struggles were mildly amusing. To her, "They're not bailing me out," I said quietly. "Oh, come on. That's what parents do, right? Help their kids when they're struggling. Though honestly, I don't know how much help they can really give right now. Dad's been stressed about money lately. I think it's because he's been so generous with me. He just bought me this dress for my date tonight." She twirled, showing off. "The expensive fabric. Isn't it gorgeous?" I watched my 25-year-old sister, who had never held a job for more than 3 months, who had never paid her own rent, who had never worried about where her next meal was coming from, criticize me for having a baby I couldn't afford while wearing a dress that cost more than I made in a week. "Emma," I said carefully, "how much do you think Mom and Dad spend on you in a month?" She laughed, the sound light and careless. "I don't really keep track. They love spoiling me, always have. Dad says I deserve nice things because I'm his princess." She said it without any self-awareness, without any recognition of how those words might sound to her sister who was struggling to buy groceries. "And you don't think maybe they should help with Lily too? She's their granddaughter." Emma's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of discomfort. "Well, that's different. Lily was your choice. My things are ... gifts, expressions of love. It's not the same thing at all." I nodded slowly, letting her words settle into the silence. On my phone, discreetly recording from my purse, her entitled rationalization was being captured perfectly. She had just articulated exactly what I'd always known but could never prove. In our family, Emma's wants were considered expressions of love, while my needs, and now my daughter's needs, were seen as burdens. After she left that night, leaving, behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and the bitter taste of injustice, I sat down with my laptop and began creating a spreadsheet. Every purchase I could identify from her social media posts, every bill I glimpsed, every casual mention of parental funding, it all went into columns with dates and estimated costs. The picture that emerged was staggering. In the 5 years since Emma had turned 21, our parents had funded a lifestyle that most working adults couldn't afford even with good jobs. Cars, clothes, vacations, rent, food, entertainment. Emma's entire existence was subsidized, while I worked double shifts and still struggled to make ends meet. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the casualness of it. The way she could criticize my choices while being completely supported by the same parents who had sold my baby's crib for her entertainment. It was the way she genuinely seemed to believe she deserved luxury while I deserved struggle. As I closed my laptop that night, I realized something important. Emma wasn't just the beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, she was an active participant in maintaining it. She had learned to weaponize their love, to position herself as deserving while casting me as the burden. That knowledge would be useful very soon. The small digital recorder became my constant companion, hidden in my purse during every family interaction. What I captured over the next 6 weeks was devastating in its casual cruelty. Honestly, Robert, I don't know what Manda expected. My mother's voice was crystal clear on the recording from their living room while I was in the kitchen getting coffee. She knew we couldn't afford to help with baby expenses when Emma needs so much support right now. The girls got to learn responsibility sometime, Dad replied. Emma's different. She's got that spark, that specialness. Manda's always been more practical. She figured it out. I just feel bad about the crib situation, Mom continued, though her tone suggested more annoyance than guilt. But Emma was so excited about that concert, and you know how she gets when she's disappointed. The baby won't remember sleeping in a drawer for a few weeks, Dad said with a laugh. Amanda's tough. She's used to making do. I'd been standing frozen in their kitchen, coffee pot in hand, listening to them dismiss my daughter's comfort as if it were nothing. On the recording, you could hear the exact moment I dropped the pot, a sharp crash, followed by hurried footsteps, and concerned voices asking if I was okay, but that conversation was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I captured dozens of similar exchanges. My parents discussing how dramatic I was being about needing help. Emma complaining that my pregnancy was taking attention away from her needs. The family conversations where my name only came up in the context of being too demanding or ungrateful. The most damaging recording came during a Sunday dinner 3 weeks after Lily's birth. Emma had been going on about wanting to redecorate her an apartment our parents were paying for, and had mentioned needing $5,000 for new furniture. Of course, sweetheart, Mom had said immediately. You deserve a beautiful space. That's when I'd made my request. Actually, I was hoping I could ask for some help too. Lily's pediatrician wants me to switch to a more expensive formula, and with the medical bills from the delivery, Manda, honey, Dad had interrupted. You know, money's tight right now. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma had gotten immediate approval for $5,000 in furniture, but I was being told money was tight when asking for help with my infant's basic nutrition. Maybe you could look into government assistance, Mom had suggested gently. There are programs for single mothers. On the recording, you could hear the exact moment my fork clinked against my plate as I set it down. Government assistance for formula while you're buying Emma furniture. That's completely different, Emma had snapped. I'm not asking for charity. This is family helping family. And what am I? I'd asked quietly. The pause that followed was telling. Then Emma's voice, sharp with irritation. You're being unfair, Amanda. Mom and Dad have always helped me because I appreciate it. You just make them feel guilty and take advantage. Take advantage? My voice on the recording was barely controlled. By asking for help with my baby's medical needs, by having a baby you couldn't afford and expecting everyone else to pick up the pieces. Emma had shot back. What made the recording so powerful wasn't just Emma's cruelty, it was my parents' silence. They hadn't corrected her, hadn't defended. Me hadn't pointed out the obvious hypocrisy. Their silence was agreement. Later that same evening, I'd captured Emma talking to someone on the phone, probably a friend, while I was supposedly in the bathroom. I know, right? She acts like having a baby is this huge sacrifice that everyone should celebrate, but honestly, she's just jealous because Mom and Dad love me more. They always have. She could never accept that some people are just special and some people are just ordinary. The casual viciousness in her voice was breathtaking, but what came next was even worse. The funniest part is that she thinks she's so responsible and mature, but she's the one who had a baby with some loser who disappeared the second things got real. At least when I mess up, it's with style. I'd stood in their hallway bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, listening to my sister reduce my daughter's existence to a character flaw while simultaneously dismissing every struggle I'd guys faced as a single mother. But the most useful recording came 2 days later, when I'd called to ask if they could babysit Lily for a few hours so I could attend a job interview. The opportunity was for a position with better pay and benefits, exactly the kind of step up that would help me provide better for my daughter. "Oh, Manda, I'm sorry, but we're taking Emma shopping for her friend's wedding," Mom had said. "She needs a new dress and shoes, and you know how important it is that she looks perfect." "It's just for 3 hours," I'd press. "This job could really help. Honey, we already committed to Emma. Maybe you could ask a neighbor." A neighbor. To watch my newborn daughter, so I could attend a job interview. While they spent the day shopping for Emma's wedding guest outfit, I'd hung up the phone and immediately called back, knowing they wouldn't answer, but hoping to catch their real reaction on their voicemail. Instead, I'd gotten something better. Emma had answered, clearly not realizing who was calling. "God, finally. I thought she was going to keep begging." "Mom, we should just tell her directly that her problems aren't our responsibility. I'm so tired of her acting like having a baby makes her special." "Emma, hang up the phone," I'd heard my mother say in the background. But the damage was done. That night, I'd sat in my apartment listening to hours of recordings, transcribing the most damaging quotes, organizing them by date and theme. What emerged was an undeniable pattern of emotional abuse, financial favoritism, and casual cruelty that went far beyond simple sibling rivalry. They hadn't just failed to support me, they had actively decided I didn't deserve support. And now I had proof. The discovery that changed everything came by accident while I was cleaning out my closet to sell clothes for extra money. In a box of old papers from college, I found a letter I'd forgotten about, one my grandmother had given me shortly before. She died when I was 19. "For your education," the letter had said in her careful handwriting. "I'm so proud of the young woman you've become, Manda. This will help you build the future you deserve." Attached was a copy of a section from her, leaving me $25,000 specifically designated for educational expenses. I remember Grandma Rose pressing the papers into my hands during her final hospital stay, telling me she'd arranged everything with my parents since I was still a minor when the will was written, but I'd never seen a penny of that money. The confusion I'd felt at 19 came flooding back. When Grandma died 6 months later, I'd asked my parents about the education fund she'd mentioned. They'd looked uncomfortable and said there must have been some misunderstanding that Grandma's estate had been smaller than expected after medical bills, and that there wasn't any money left for education funds. So I'd taken out student loans, worked 3 jobs through college, and graduated with crushing debt, while Emma somehow got full funding for her degree at an expensive private school. Now, holding that letter again at 28, I realized I'd been robbed. I drove to the county courthouse the next day, leaving Lily with my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, the only person who'd offered to help. When my parents wouldn't babysit for my job interview, the probate records were public, and after an hour of searching through files, I found my grandmother's complete will. There it was, in legal black and white, $25,000 designated specifically for Manda Andrews' educational expenses, to be managed by her parents until her 21st birthday, and then released directly to her for qualified educational costs. But there was more, much more. According to the probate documents, my grandmother's estate had been worth significantly more than my parents had claimed. After all debts and medical expenses, there had been nearly $80,000 remaining. The will had been specific: 25,000 for my education, 25,000 for Emma's education when she reached college age, 20,000 to my parents, and the remaining 10,000 split between various charities. I requested copies of all the financial documents, my hands trembling as I paid the filing fees. The clerk, a kind older woman who must have recognized the look of someone uncovering painful family secrets, had been gentle and efficient. The truth was laid out in bank transfers and financial records spanning nearly a decade. The money designated for my education had been used for Emma's high school private tutoring, her SAT prep courses, her college application consulting, and her dorm room furnishing. My 25,000 had funded Emma's path to the expensive private college that our parents claimed they were sacrificing to afford, but they hadn't stopped there. Emma's designated 25,000 had also been spent on her cars, spring break trips, sorority fees, and living expenses that kept her from needing any part-time job during college. By the time Emma graduated, those educational funds had been completely drained on her behalf, while I'd struggled through community college with student loans and night shifts at a grocery store. The cruelest part was the timing. The final transfer of my money had occurred during my sophomore year of college, right around the time I'd asked my parents for help with textbooks and had been told they were stretched thin. Financially, they'd been stretched thin because they were using my inheritance to pay for Emma's spring break trip to Kinkin. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, staring at the financial documents that proved what I'd always suspected but could never articulate. I hadn't just been the unfavored daughter, I'd been actively robbed to fund my sister's advantages. That night, I called my Aunt Sarah for the first time in 5 years. She'd been estranged from the family since a blow-up at Grandma's funeral. Something about respecting Rose's wishes that I'd been too young and grief-stricken to understand at the time. Manda? Her voice was surprised but warm. Honey, how are you? I heard about the baby congratulations. Aunt Sarah, I need to ask you something about Grandma's will. The silence that followed was heavy. Then, quietly, what did you find out? So she'd known. She'd known, and the family fight hadn't been about funeral arrangements or sentiment. It had been about my inheritance. They took it all, didn't they? I said, oh, honey. Her voice broke slightly. I tried to stop them. I told them what Rose wanted, what she'd intended, that they said you were too young to handle that kind of money responsibly, and that they'd use it for your benefit when the time was right. When was the time supposed to be right? Never, apparently. I tried to stay involved, to make sure Rose's wishes were honored, but your parents froze me out completely when I started asking questions about where the money was going. I'm so sorry. Manda, I should have fought harder. We talked for 2 hours that night, and I learned things about my family that explained so much. The favoritism toward Emma hadn't started with my parents. It went back generations, a pattern of elevating the special child while treating the responsible one as a servant. Aunt Sarah had been the responsible one in her generation, watching as her sister and my mother got opportunities and support that were never offered to her. But Rose saw through it, Aunt Sarah said. She loved both you girls, but she saw how hard you worked, how thoughtful and determined you were. She wanted to make sure you had opportunities that weren't dependent on your parents' favoritism. She never intended for Emma to get double funding. God, no. Rose was very specific about fairness. She thought Emma was spoiled even as a child, and she worried about what kind of adult she'd become if she never had to work for anything. As I hung up the phone that night, I realized I wasn't just dealing with favoritism or casual cruelty anymore. This was fraud. This was theft. This was a deliberate conspiracy to rob me of my grandmother's love and support, redirecting it to further advantage the child who already had every advantage. But unlike the emotional abuse, this had left a paper trail. Unlike the favoritism, this was legally actionable. Unlike their casual dismissal of my needs, this was a crime, and I finally had the power to do something about it. The hospital bills arrived like a daily reminder how alone I was in this world. Each envelope contained another facet of Lily's birth: the emergency room visit when my water broke 2 weeks early, the extended labor, the complications that required additional monitoring, the pediatric consultations for her initial breathing difficulties. Total cost $18,412. My insurance covered most of it, but the remaining $3,000 might as well have been $3 million for all my ability to pay it. I spread the bills across my kitchen table next to my laptop, where Emma's latest Instagram posts glowed mockingly on the screen. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, a weekend spa retreat with her girlfriends, all funded by parents who claimed money was tight when it came to their granddaughter's medical expenses. Lily was crying again. She'd been fussier lately. And I suspected the generic formula wasn't agreeing with her stomach the way the premium brand had in the hospital. But the premium formula cost twice as much, and I was already rationing my own meals to afford the basics. At 2 a.m. During another sleepless night of feeding and changing and rocking a restless baby, I finally understood the full scope of my isolation. I had no one. My parents had made it clear that my needs came second to Emma's wants. I had no partner to share the burden. My few friends from college had drifted away over the years, busy with their own lives and probably uncomfortable with my increasingly difficult circumstances. It was just me and Lily against the world, and I was failing her. I'd lost my job at the diner the week before, not officially fired. But my boss had made it clear that the flexibility I needed as a new mother wasn't compatible with their needs. Maybe when the baby's older, he'd said with false sympathy, when you can be more reliable. So now I was unemployed, behind on rent, drowning in medical bills, and watching my daughter suffer because I couldn't afford proper formula. Meanwhile, Emma was posting pictures of $100 brunches and complaining about how stressful it was to choose between 2 vacation destinations our parents were willing to fund. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Lily had been crying for 3 hours straight. Nothing I did helped: feeding, changing, rocking, singing, walking the floors of our tiny apartment until my legs ached. She was hungry, but the formula I could afford was clearly upsetting her stomach, creating a cycle of discomfort that broke. My heart. In desperation, I called my mother one more time. Mom, please, I just need help with the formula. The pediatrician says she needs the sensitive formula, but it's $60 a container, and I'm Manda, honey. We've been over this. Money is really tight right now. In the background, I could hear Emma laughing about something, and my mother's voice became muffled as she apparently covered the phone. Actually, can I call you back? Emma and I are heading out to look at furniture for her living room makeover. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen with a screaming baby and the crushing realization that I was truly on my own. That's when I noticed the eviction notice that had been slipped under my door. 30 days. I had 30 days to come up with 2 months back rent plus fees, or Lily and I would be homeless. The paper shook in my hands as I read the legal language that spelled out our potential destitution in careful, formal terms. I set Lily in her makeshift crib, stole the dresser drawer lined with blankets because I couldn't afford a real crib, and sank onto my couch with my laptop. Almost without thinking, I navigated to Emma's Instagram account. Her latest post was from that morning, a boomerang video of her spinning in a boutique, trying on expensive dresses with the caption, "Decisions, decisions. Dad says I can get whichever. One makes me happiest. Hashtag blessed, hashtag DADDYS girl." The dress she was modeling cost $400. I knew because I'd clicked through to the boutique's website, torturing myself with the price tag of a single garment that could have covered Lily's formula for 2 months. As I stared at that post, at my sister's casual joy in spending money, she hadn't earned while my daughter went hungry. Something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just unfair. This was systematic. This was intentional. This was a family structure designed to ensure Emma's comfort at the expense of my survival. But it was also unsustainable, and it was built on lies, theft, and fraud that I could now prove. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not a journal entry this time, but a plan. A methodical, strategic plan for exposing everything and reclaiming what had been. Stolen from my daughter and me, they thought I was the quiet one, the one who would always suffer in silence while Emma lived in luxury. They thought I would always be too overwhelmed, too desperate, too grateful for scraps to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been taught as I worked through the night. Lily finally settled into peaceful sleep in her drawer bed. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope that my family would suddenly become fair and loving, but the practical hope that comes from having a plan, having evidence, and having nothing left to lose. By morning, I would know exactly what I needed to do. The text messages I discovered changed everything about how I understood my parents' behavior. It happened by accident. Mom had asked me to help her with her phone storage issues. And while backing up her photos, I saw the message thread between her and Dad from the day Lily was born. Robert, Bamba's been asking about help again. It's getting uncomfortable. What kind of help now? Baby stuff. Formula, diapers, medical bills, the usual guilt trip. We can't keep enabling her poor choices. She chose to have this baby knowing she couldn't afford it. I know, but she's making me feel terrible about the crib situation. Maybe we should have warned her before we sold it. For Emma's concert tickets? Absolutely not. Emma deserved that experience. Manda needs to learn that actions have consequences. Sometimes I think we were too easy on her growing up. She never learned to be independent like Emma has. I stared at the screen, reading those words over and over. Emma, who had never paid rent, never held a steady job, never faced a single financial consequence in her 25 years, was the independent one. I, who had been working and supporting myself since 18, was the one being enabled by asking for help with my newborn's medical needs. But the messages got worse. Emma mentioned that Manda seemed upset at dinner Sunday. Do you think we're being too harsh? Harsh? We've spent our entire lives giving that girl opportunities. If she can't appreciate what she has, that's her problem. But the baby is innocent and all this ... The baby will be fine. Manda is tougher than Emma. She'll figure it out. Emma needs our support more because she's sensitive. Sensitive? Emma was sensitive, so she deserved unlimited financial support. I was tough, so I deserved to struggle alone with a newborn. I scrolled further back, finding months of similar conversations. Messages about how my pregnancy was inconvenient timing because Emma was going through a difficult period with her on and off boyfriend. Discussions about how my requests for help were manipulative and guilt-inducing. Plans to redirect conversations whenever I brought up money or support. The most damaging thread was from 3 weeks earlier, right after I'd asked them to babysit Lily for my job interview. Manda called asking us to watch the baby again. I told her we're busy with Emma's shopping trip. Good. She needs to figure out childcare on her own. We can't be her fallback every time she needs something. Do you think we should help with the job interview, though? She seemed pretty desperate. She's always desperate about something. First it was the crib, then formula, now babysitting. If we help once, she expects it all the time. Emma thinks we should be firmer with boundaries. Emma's right. She understands that family support has to be earned, not demanded. They had actively discussed my desperation and decided to ignore it. They had consciously chosen to prioritize Emma's shopping trip over their granddaughter's well-being. And Emma, the primary beneficiary of their unlimited support, was advising them to be firmer with me. But the messages that truly revealed their mindset came from a conversation last month. Sometimes I feel guilty about the difference in how we treat the girls. Different children need different approaches, Helen. Emma thrives with encouragement and support. Manda has always been more resilient. But don't you think Manda might thrive with encouragement too? Manda doesn't need encouragement the way Emma does. She's got that inner strength. Emma is more fragile. She needs us more. I suppose you're right. Emma has always been special. Exactly. Some children are born to shine, and others are born to be steady. We're just supporting their natural roles. Natural roles. Emma was born to shine, and I was born to be steady. Emma was fragile and needed support. I was resilient and could handle anything. They had created a mythology around our differences that justified every disparity in treatment, every cruel choice, every moment of favoritism. I screenshot every conversation, building a digital record of their calculated indifference. But what struck me most wasn't the cruelty, it was the self-awareness. They knew they were treating us differently. They had discussed it, rationalized it, and chosen to continue it. This wasn't unconscious bias or accidental favoritism. This was a deliberate family structure maintained through conscious choices and careful justifications. A week later, I got more evidence when Emma accidentally sent me a text meant for our mother. "Mom, can you transfer the usual amount? I'm running low and want to book that spa weekend. Also, has Manda stopped asking for help yet? It's getting annoying how needy she's being about the baby." When I didn't respond, she called immediately. "Oh my God, that wasn't meant for you," she said, laughing nervously. "You know how autocorrect can be." "What's the usual amount, Emma?" "What? Oh, that's nothing. Just ... You know, family stuff. How much do they give you each month?" The pause was telling. It's not like that, Manda. It's not regular payments or anything. They just help when I need things. "And how often do you need things?" "Look, this is between me and them, okay? You wouldn't understand because you've always been so independent and proud. They know you don't like accepting help." "I don't like accepting help." After months of begging for assistance with basic necessities, after being told repeatedly that money was tight, after watching my daughter go without while Emma lived in luxury, I was the one who didn't like accepting help. That night, I sat down and calculated what I'd learned from the texts and bank records I glimpsed. Emma received approximately $3,000 per month in help from our parents, plus major purchases like cars, furniture, and vacation funding. In the past 5 years, they had given her over $200,000 in that same period. I had received nothing except criticism for needing support, but now I understood it wasn't just favoritism, it was a carefully maintained system where Emma's needs were automatically legitimate and mine were automatically suspect, where Emma's comfort was a family priority and my survival was my own responsibility. They had turned emotional manipulation into an art form, convincing themselves that their cruelty was actually kindness, that their favoritism was actually wisdom, that their abandonment of me was actually respect for my strength. But their text messages told a different story. Their own words proved that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they had chosen to do it anyway. The eviction notice taped to my door on a gray Thursday morning was the final insult in a symphony of injustices. Bright orange paper with official county seals, it announced that I had 7 days to pay $3,200 in back rent and fees, or Lily and I would be forcibly removed from our apartment. 7 days. 72 hours to come up with money I didn't have for a home I was about to lose. I stood in my hallway, holding my 3-month-old daughter, staring at the legal document that spelled out our potential homelessness in cold, bureaucratic language. Lily had been fussier than usual that morning. She was outgrowing her clothes, and I couldn't afford new ones. The generic formula was still upsetting her stomach, but the premium formula remained beyond my reach. Everything about our life was becoming increasingly desperate while my family lived in luxury just 10 miles away. In a moment of pure desperation, I called my father's office. Dad, please. I know you said money is tight, but I'm about to be evicted. Lily and I will be homeless if I can't come up with the rent money. I'll pay you back as soon as I find work, I promise. The pause on the line stretched so long, I thought. He'd hung up. Manda, honey, we've discussed this. We can't keep bailing you out every time you face a setback. You need to learn to handle these situations on your own. This isn't a setback, Dad. This is homelessness. Your granddaughter will be living in my car. There are resources for people in your situation. Shelters, government assistance programs. Maybe this is the wake-up call you need to get your life on track. Shelters. He was suggesting that his granddaughter should live in a homeless shelter because helping us would somehow undermine my character development. Dad, please, I'm begging you. Just this once. I'm sorry, Amanda, but the answer is no. Emma needs our support right now, and we can't stretch ourselves any thinner. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the screaming baby and the crushing weight of absolute abandonment. 2 hours later, Emma posted on Instagram. The photos showed her at an expensive spa resort, getting a massage, lounging by a pool, enjoying what appeared to be a weekend getaway that probably cost more than my entire rent situation. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need to treat yourself. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for surprising me with this amazing weekend. I've been so stressed lately, and this is exactly what I needed." Hashtag blessed hash family, hashtag self-care. I stared at those photos for a long time. Emma, glowing and relaxed in a luxury spa, being treated to a weekend that could have saved my home, while I faced homelessness with her infant niece. The same parents who couldn't stretch themselves any thinner to prevent their granddaughter's eviction had just funded a spa weekend for their 25-year-old daughter because she was stressed. But what broke me wasn't just the hypocrisy, it was the timing. They had to have planned this trip, booked it, paid for it, all while knowing I was facing eviction. Emma had to have known about my situation when she accepted their gift. They all knew, and they had chosen the spa weekend anyway. I called Emma directly, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Oh my God, Manda, you should see this place." The massage therapist said I have incredible skin, and the cucumber water is literally life-changing. I feel like a completely new person. Emma, I'm being evicted. The silence stretched uncomfortably. What? When? 7 days. Dad said they can't help because money is tight, and you need their support right now. Another pause. Then, carefully, well, I mean, this trip was planned weeks ago, and I have been really stressed with everything going on. What's going on in your life that's stressful? Just life stuff. Relationship drama, figuring out my career path, dealing with social pressure. It's been really hard. I looked around my apartment at the empty nursery corner, at the bills spread across my kitchen table, at my daughter sleeping in a drawer because we couldn't afford proper furniture, and tried to process my sister's explanation of stress. "Emma, your niece is about to be homeless." That's really hard, Manda, and I feel terrible about it. But you've always been so good at handling crisis situations. You're like super resilient. I'm more the type who needs support and encouragement to get through difficult times. So you deserve a spa weekend while Lily faces eviction? It's not about deserving anything. It's about family recognizing different needs. Mom and Dad understand that I function better with emotional support and nurturing. You've always been more independent. Independent? I was independent, therefore I deserve to struggle alone. Emma was sensitive, therefore she deserves spa weekends. while her niece faced homelessness. Emma, please. Can you ask them to help? Or maybe you could, Manda. I can't get involved in financial stuff between you and mom and dad. That's between you guys. Besides, I don't really understand money stuff. Anyway, dad handles all my finances. She didn't understand money because she'd never had to. Dad handled her finances because she'd never been required to handle her own. And now, when her 3-month-old niece was facing homelessness, she couldn't get involved because money was too complicated for her to understand. After I hung up, I sat on my couch with Lily and looked around our tiny apartment one last time. This was where I brought her home from the hospital. This was where I'd walked the floors with her during those first terrifying weeks. This was where I'd imagined building a life for us. Modest but stable. Now it was just temporary shelter that I was about to lose because my family had collectively decided that Emma's spa treatments were more important than their granddaughter's housing. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The desperation was still there, but underneath it was something harder, colder, more determined. They had pushed me past the point of begging, past the point of hoping for fairness, past the point of believing that family meant anything more than an accident of genetics. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. Not to my parents, not to Emma, but to the lawyer Aunt Sarah had recommended. It was time to stop asking for help and start demanding justice. It was time to stop being the quiet, responsible daughter and start being the woman who would protect her child at any cost. They thought my desperation made me weak. They were about to learn it made me dangerous. The spreadsheet I created became my obsession and my salvation. Working late into the night while Lily slept, I methodically documented every financial disparity, every recorded conversation, every piece of evidence that proved the systematic theft and favoritism that had shaped my entire life. The numbers were staggering when laid out in stark columns and rows. Emma's documented support over the past 5 years, $247,000, car payments, rent, credit cards, vacations, shopping sprees, emergency bailouts, and luxury experiences. I had screenshots of receipts, bank transfers glimpsed during visits, social media posts showing expensive purchases with grateful tags to mom and dad, and credit card statements that painted a picture of someone living far beyond any reasonable means. My documented support over the same period, $0, not $1 in direct financial assistance, despite repeated requests for help with basic necessities. But the financial records were just the foundation. The real power was in the audio recordings and text messages that revealed the intentional nature of their choices. I transcribed the most damaging quotes, organized them by theme, and cross-referenced them with financial records to show the context. The inheritance theft alone was a legal goldmine. I have the original will, the probate records, the bank transfers, and documentation of every dollar that had been diverted from my education fund to Emma's lifestyle. With compound interest calculated from the date of theft, they owed me over $40,000 money that could have changed my entire life trajectory, but I needed more than just financial records. I needed to document the pattern of emotional manipulation and psychological abuse that had enabled the theft. So I began creating detailed timelines, cross-referencing my recordings with bank statements and social media posts to show how their cruelty escalated whenever I asked for the support they freely gave Emma. The pattern was unmistakable. Every time I requested help for education, for medical bills, for basic survival, they would simultaneously increase their support for Emma. When I'd asked for help with college textbooks, they'd bought Emma a car. When I'd requested assistance with my pregnancy expenses, they'd funded Emma's spring break trip. When I'd begged for help with Lily's medical bills, they paid for Emma's spa weekend. It wasn't just favoritism, it was systematic punishment for having needs. I also began researching the legal definitions of financial abuse and inheritance fraud. What I discovered gave me hope for the first time in months. My parents' actions weren't just morally wrong, they were legally actionable. Misappropriating inheritance funds, especially with documented intent to defraud, carried serious civil and potentially criminal penalties. The most damaging evidence came from my mother's own handwriting. While helping her organize old papers the previous month, I dephotographed several documents, including a notebook where she tracked expenses. In her careful script, I found entries like Emma's Europe trip, education fund, and Emma's car down payment, education fund. She had literally labeled the theft, documenting exactly which of Emma's luxuries had been funded by my stolen inheritance. But perhaps the most powerful evidence was the recording I'd made during Emma's last visit, when she'd unknowingly revealed the family's true attitude toward my situation. I mean, I get that Manda's struggling, but that's kind of her choice, isn't it? She could have stayed in school like I did, could have found a better job, could have not gotten pregnant. Mom and Dad have always been there for her. She just doesn't appreciate it the way I do. On the recording, you could hear me asking quietly, how have they been there for me? Emma's response was devastating in its casual cruelty. Well, they gave you a place to live growing up, food, clothes, all that basic stuff. That's more than some people get. I think she expects too much and isn't grateful for what she's already received. Basic stuff. Food and shelter during childhood was Emma's idea of generous parental support. While she herself received hundreds of thousands in luxury funding as an adult, I compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier, financial records, audio transcripts, legal documents, timelines, and photographic evidence. The folder grew to over 300 pages of undeniable proof that my parents had systematically robbed and emotionally abused me while lavishing stolen money on Emma, but I also needed leverage beyond legal action. I researched my parents, social and professional circles, documenting their public image as loving, generous family people. Dad's involvement in his church leadership. Mom's participation in charity fundraisers. Their reputation as devoted grandparents, though they'd never actually spent time with Lily or contributed to her care. The contrast between their public image and their private cruelty would be devastating if exposed. I began preparing a second. Folder 1 designed not for legal action, but for social consequences. Screenshots of Emma's luxury lifestyle funded by stolen inheritance money. Recordings of them dismissing their granddaughter's needs while funding spa weekends. Documentation of their lies about being financially stressed while maintaining detailed. Records of massive support for Emma by Dawn. I had two weapons. Legal action that could recover my stolen inheritance and expose their fraud, and social exposure that could destroy the carefully crafted image they'd built in their community. But the most important document I created wasn't for lawyers or public exposure. It was a letter to Lily, explaining why I was about to turn our family upside down. She was too young to understand now, but someday she would need to know that when her mother's back was against the wall, when her basic needs were dismissed while her aunt lived in luxury, I had chosen to fight rather than accept injustice. Your grandmother's love was stolen from us, I wrote, but I'm going to get it back. You deserve to inherit more than just the leftovers of other people's cruelty. You deserve justice, security, and a mother who stands up for what's right. As I sealed that letter in an envelope marked for Lily when she's old enough to understand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. They had made their choice when they sold my baby's crib for concert tickets. Now I was making mine. Aunt Sarah's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a courier service, the envelope thick with official letterhead from her law firm. I hadn't expected her to be an attorney. That detail had somehow never come up in our late night phone conversations about family history and stolen inheritances. My dear Manda, The letter began in her elegant handwriting. I should have told you sooner that I'm not just your aunt who got pushed out of the family. I'm also the estate attorney who tried to prevent exactly what happened to your grandmother's will. My hands trembled as I read the rest. Aunt Sarah hadn't just witnessed the theft of my inheritance, she had legally advised against it, had threatened to report it, and had been systematically excluded from family events because she refused to stay silent about the fraud. Your parents came to me when Rose's will was being probated, she wrote. They claimed you were too irresponsible to handle education money directly and asked me to help them establish a trust that would give them control over the funds. When I refused and insisted the money go directly to you as Rose intended, they took the case to another attorney, one who was more willing to bend the law for the right fee. But the letter contained something even more valuable than validation, evidence I hadn't known existed. I kept copies of everything, Sarah wrote. Every document, every communication, every attempt I made to protect your interests. I have the original correspondence where your parents explicitly stated their intention to use your education fund for Emma's expenses instead. I have the emails where they discussed hiding the true value of Rose's estate from you. I have recordings of phone calls where they planned to lie about why no education money was available. Recordings. She had recordings from 9 years ago that proved premeditation and conspiracy. The letter concluded with an invitation. If you're ready to fight this, I'm ready to represent you, pro bono. It's the least I can do for Rose's granddaughter and the least I can do to finally make this right. I called her immediately, my hands still shaking. Aunt Sarah, I can't believe you kept all of that. Honey, I knew this day would come. I knew eventually you'd figure out what they'd done, and I wanted to be ready to help you get justice when you did. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her voice was gentle but firm. Because you weren't ready to hear it. You were still hoping they'd change, still believing that if you just worked hard enough or needed little enough, they'd finally treat you fairly. You had to reach the point where you were ready to stop hoping and start fighting. She was right. Even 6 months ago, if someone had handed me proof of my parents' theft, I might have used it to guilt them into helping rather than to seek real justice. I might have settled for crumbs and apologies rather than demanding full restitution. But now, sitting in an apartment I was about to lose while my daughter slept in a drawer and my sister posted spa photos, I was ready for war. What exactly do you have? I asked. Everything, Manda. Audio recordings of them planning to steal your money. Written correspondence discussing how to hide the theft. Bank records showing the exact transfers. Documentation of every lie they told you about the estate's value. I even have emails where they coached each other on what to say if you ever ask questions. The evidence Sarah had collected painted a picture of calculated fraud that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. They hadn't just taken opportunity when it arose. They had actively conspired to rob me, planning their lies and cover-ups in advance. There's something else, Sarah continued. Something that might hurt to hear, but you need to know. They didn't just steal your education fund, Manda. They also took the $20,000 Rose left specifically for your first home down payment. My breath caught. What home down payment? Rose was very specific. She wanted to make sure you had money for education and money to start building equity instead of paying rent forever. $25,000 for education, $20,000 for housing, and another $5,000 for what she called getting started in life, basically emergency money for a young adult. $50,000. They had stolen $50,000 from me, not $25,000 as I thought. The scope of the theft was even more devastating than I'd realized. Where did that money go? Emma's car, Emma's apartment deposit, Emma's credit card payments. They used your housing money to set Emma up in the lifestyle she wanted while you've been struggling with rent your entire adult life. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what had been taken from me. That money would have changed Everything, my education, my housing situation, my ability to provide for Lily, my entire life trajectory. Sarah, I want them to pay for all of it. Not just the money, I want consequences for what they've done. Good, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Because I've been waiting 9 years to destroy them for this. We're going to file civil suits for inheritance fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion. We're going to demand full restitution with compound interest. And Manda, yes, we're also going to make sure everyone in their social circle knows exactly what kind of people they really are. Rose's will wasn't just about money. It was about her love for you, her belief in your potential, her desire to give you opportunities. They didn't just steal your inheritance. They stole your grandmother's love and twisted it into something that benefited your sister instead. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen holding the letter, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I wasn't alone anymore. Sarah hadn't just offered legal representation, she'd offered validation, family alliance, and 9 years' worth of carefully preserved evidence. But more than that, she'd offered me something my parents never had, unconditional support. She wasn't helping me because I'd earned it, or because I'd been grateful enough, or because I'd asked nicely. She was helping me because what had happened to me was wrong, and wrong things deserved to be made right. That night, I called her back with one more question. Sarah, when we win this case, when we get the money back and expose what they did, what happens to Emma? She's been the beneficiary of stolen money her entire adult life. The pause was brief, but telling. Emma is going to learn what it feels like to live without stolen money funding her lifestyle. She's going to discover who she really is when she has to support herself for the first time in her life. Will that destroy her? Manda, Emma is 25 years old. It's past time she learned to be an adult. What happened to her after that is her choice. She can rise to the challenge or she can crumble. But either way, it won't be funded by money that was stolen from you. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my motivation had shifted. This wasn't just about getting justice for myself anymore. It was about breaking a cycle that had poisoned my family for decades. It was about making sure Lily grew up in a world where fairness mattered, where theft had consequences, and where the responsible people weren't automatically sacrificed for the comfortable people that Sarah had given me. More than legal representation, she'd given me an army of one, armed with evidence and driven by nearly a decade of suppressed righteous anger. The war was about to begin. Sarah's law office was everything I'd imagined successful legal practice would look like: polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and diplomas that spoke of expertise and authority. But what struck me most was how Sarah looked in her professional environment, confident, formidable, and absolutely certain of her ability to deliver justice. She'd arranged for childcare in the office so I could bring Lily, understanding that I had no one else to watch her. As I settled into the leather chair across from her massive desk, Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier, I felt like I was finally in a room where my problems would be taken seriously. Let's start with the inheritance fraud, Sarah said, spreading documents across her desk like a general planning a battle. What your parents did wasn't just morally wrong, it was legally criminal. They deliberately misappropriated funds designated by a will, lied about the estate's value, and used the money for purposes explicitly forbidden by the testator. She pointed to a section of legal code she'd highlighted. Under state law, inheritance, fraud carries both civil and criminal penalties. We can sue for treble damages, 3 times the amount stolen plus compound interest calculated from the date of theft. How much money are we talking about? Sarah opened her calculator and began entering numbers. The original $50,000, compounded annually at the legal interest rate over 9 years, comes to approximately $73,000. Treble damages would make that $219,000. I stared at her, unable to process that figure. $200,000, plus attorney fees, court costs, and potentially punitive damages if we can prove malicious intent, which we absolutely can, given the recordings and written evidence we have. She pulled out another folder. But the inheritance fraud is just the beginning. We also have strong cases for intentional infliction of emotional distress, financial abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty. Your parents had a legal obligation to manage that inheritance in your best interests, and instead they deliberately used it to harm you while benefiting Emma. What does that mean in practical terms? It means we can go after them for every dollar they've given Emma that should have come from your legitimate inheritance. The cars, the rent payments, the credit cards, the vacations, all of it was funded by money that legally belonged to you. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. Manda, I need you to understand something. Once we file these suits, there's no going back. Your relationship with your parents will be permanently destroyed. Emma will likely never speak to you again. Your family, as you know, it will cease to exist. I looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos of her young life. My family, as I know, it has already caused me to be evicted while my daughter sleeps in a drawer. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be preserving. Good answer. Sarah smiled grimly. Because we're not just going to file civil suits. We're also going to file a criminal complaint for inheritance fraud. This case is strong, enough that the district attorney will likely pursue criminal charges. My parents could face jail time for what they'd done to me. How long will this take? Civil suits can take 18 months to 2 years. Criminal proceedings, if filed, could take longer. But here's what we can do immediately. We can file for emergency injunctive relief to freeze their assets and prevent them from disposing of property or hiding money before judgment. She pulled out another document. We can also file a demand letter requiring immediate restitution. Sometimes, when faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of criminal prosecution, defendants choose to settle quickly rather than face public exposure and legal consequences. What are the chances they'll settle? Sarah considered this carefully. Given the strength of our evidence and the potential for criminal charges. Hey, your parents have built their lives around maintaining a respectable public image. The prospect of being publicly exposed as thieves who stole from their own daughter to fund their favorite child's lifestyle will be devastating to them. She handed me a business card with the name and number of a private investigator. We're also going to hire someone to do a complete financial investigation. I want to know exactly how much money they have, where it's hidden, and what assets we can target for recovery. If they've been this dishonest about your inheritance, there may be other financial crimes we haven't discovered yet. Is this really necessary? The private investigator? Manda, people who steal $50,000 from their own daughter don't usually stop there. We need to know the full scope of their financial manipulation. Also, if they try to hide assets or transfer money to Emma before we can collect judgment, we need to be prepared to trace and recover those funds. She opened one final folder. Now, let's talk about the recordings you've made. These are incredibly damaging evidence, but we need to make sure they're legally admissible. Fortunately, this is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without informing the other parties. What about the text messages I saw on my mother's phone? Those are more complicated, but since you had her permission to access her phone for legitimate technical support, we can argue that you had implicit consent to view the messages. Either way, they're useful as supporting evidence, even if they're not admissible in court. Sarah gathered all the documents and looked at me seriously. Before we proceed, I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want. Once we file these papers, your parents will likely retaliate. They may try to. turn other family members against you, spread lies about your motivations, or attempt to paint you as the villain in this situation. I thought about the eviction notice taped to my door, about Lily sleeping in a drawer while Emma posted spa photos, about a lifetime of being treated as invisible while my sister was treated as precious. Sarah, they already turned the family against me. They already spread lies about my character and motivations. They already painted me as the villain for having needs they couldn't be bothered to meet. The only difference is that now I'm going to fight back. She nodded approvingly. Then let's destroy them legally, financially, and socially. It's time your grandmother's wishes were finally honored, and it's time your daughter inherited the security that was always meant to be yours. As I left her office that day, carrying the folder of legal documents that would change my life forever, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Lily's birth. Hope for the future. Not the desperate hope of someone begging for scraps, but the confident hope of someone who had finally found her power. They had stolen my inheritance, my childhood, my sense of self-worth, and my daughter's security. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had left evidence, and they had underestimated my willingness to use it. The legal machinery was now in motion, and there would be no stopping it until justice was served. The invitation I crafted was a masterpiece of manipulation, using every psychological tool my family had ever used against me, but in reverse. I handwrote it on elegant stationery I couldn't afford, making sure my words carried the exact tone of humility and gratitude they'd always demanded from me. Dear Mom, Dad, and Emma, I wrote in my careful script. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family relationships lately, and I realize I may have been unfair in my expectations and demands. I know you've always done your best for me, and I want to apologize for not being more appreciative of everything you've given me over the years. The words tasted like poison as I wrote them, but they were exactly what my parents wanted to hear: validation, that they were good people, and I was an ungrateful daughter who had finally come to her senses. I'd love to invite you all for dinner this Sunday to properly thank you and discuss how we can move forward as a family. I want Lily to grow up knowing her grandparents and aunt, and I think I've been letting my pride get in the way of that. Relationship. Pride. They had always accused me of having too much pride whenever I hesitated to beg for their help. Now I was offering to swallow that pride completely, which would be irresistible to them. I know Emma has been under a lot of stress lately, and I want to find ways I can be more supportive as a sister. Maybe there are opportunities for all of us to help each other more effectively. The suggestion that I might be able to help Emma. Financially laughable given my circumstances, but exactly the kind of thing that would make them curious enough to attend. Was the perfect bait. I signed it with love and gratitude, Manda, and hand-delivered it to their house on a Tuesday evening, making sure to time my visit when they'd all be together for dinner. Emma answered the door, looking surprised to see me standing there with Lily in her carrier and an envelope in my hand. Manda, what are you doing here? I wanted to give you this personally, I said, handing her the invitation with a soft smile. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize I owe you all an apology. She opened the envelope immediately, reading with growing interest. Mom, Dad, come look at this. I watched from the doorway as they gathered around the invitation, their expressions shifting from suspicion to satisfaction to genuine pleasure. This was exactly what they'd always wanted, proof that I knew my place. Acknowledgement that they were the generous ones and I was the problem. Oh, honey, my mother said, coming to give me a hug that felt like acid on my skin. We're so glad you're finally ready to work on our relationship. I think this shows real maturity, Dad added approvingly. Family is what matters most, and it takes a big person to admit when they've been wrong. Emma was practically glowing. I love that you want to support me more. I've been going through such a hard time lately, and it would mean so much to have My sister's understanding. Of course, I said gently. We're family. We should be there for each other. They accepted the invitation immediately, already making plans for what they'd bring and discussing how nice it would be to finally have a normal family dinner without all the drama I'd been creating. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The last pieces were falling into place, and Sunday's dinner would be the culmination of months of careful planning and evidence gathering. But first, I had to prepare my apartment for what would essentially be a sting operation. I spent the next 3 days cleaning obsessively, not out of any desire to impress them, but because I wanted the setting to be perfect for what was about to unfold. I borrowed dishes from my neighbor, bought groceries I couldn't afford, and even purchased a small flower arrangement to make the table look welcoming. More importantly, I set up recording equipment throughout the apartment. My phone would be recording openly on the kitchen counter, ostensibly playing music, but actually capturing everything. I had a backup recorder hidden in the living room, and a third device in my purse as insurance. I also prepared props for the revelation, printed transcripts of their most damaging recorded conversations, copies of the financial records showing Emma's supported lifestyle, documentation of the inheritance theft, and photographs of the legal documents Sarah had prepared. Everything was organized in manila folders, labeled and ready to be presented at exactly the right moment. I even prepared a timeline poster showing the correlation between my requests for help and their increased support for Emma, illustrated with bank records and social media screenshots. But the most important preparation was psychological. I practiced the conversation in my mind dozens of times, anticipating their deflections, denials, and counterattacks. I prepared responses to every possible justification they might offer, every attempt to turn the conversation back to my supposed failures and ingratitude. Sarah had coached me on staying calm, on sticking to facts rather than emotions, and on maintaining control of the narrative no matter how they tried to manipulate the situation. Remember, she'd said during our final preparation meeting, they're going to try to make you feel guilty for exposing them. They're going to claim you're being vindictive or unfair. They're going to try to turn this into a story about your ingratitude rather than their theft. How do I handle that? By staying focused on the facts. Every time they try to make it about your character, bring it back to their actions. Every time they claim they're the victims, remind them of the evidence. And remember, you're not the one who chose to make this a legal matter. They made it a legal matter when they chose to commit fraud. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully in a simple dress that suggested humility and gratitude. The costume of the reformed daughter ready to acknowledge her family's superiority. As us, I prepared the meal they'd never helped me afford, and the apartment I was about to lose, for the people who had systematically destroyed my opportunities while elevating my sisters. I felt a cold determination settle into my bones. They were expecting a reconciliation dinner with a grateful, chastened daughter ready to accept her role as the family's permanent disappointment. Instead, they were walking into a reckoning that had been 9 years in the making. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, and I went to answer it with a smile that felt like ice. They arrived like conquerors coming to accept a surrender, their faces glowing with satisfaction at my apparent capitulation. Emma was dressed in another expensive outfit I recognized from her recent social media posts, my parents beaming with the pride of people who had finally broken their difficult child into submission. "Manda, sweetheart, everything looks beautiful," my mother said, surveying the apartment with the air of someone graciously visiting a subordinate's humble dwelling. "Thank you so much for inviting us," Dad added, settling into my best chair with the comfortable authority of someone accustomed to being catered to. "It's wonderful to see you taking a more mature approach to family relationships." Emma was already exploring peeking into the nursery and making soft cooing sounds at Lily's makeshift sleeping arrangements. Oh, Manda, you've done such a nice job making this work. It's actually kind of charming how you've adapted to your situation. Charming? My daughter sleeping in a drawer was charming to the sister whose bedroom furniture had been bought with. My stolen inheritance. We sat down to dinner, and for the first 20 minutes, I played my role perfectly. I asked Emma about her latest adventures, complimented my parents on their wisdom and generosity, and expressed gratitude for all the ways they'd supported me over the years. They ate it up like starved animals, finally hearing the words they'd always demanded. You know, Emma, I said as I served dessert, I've been thinking about how to be more supportive of you during your stressful time. I know I haven't always understood the pressures you're under. Emma's eyes lit up. Oh my God, yes. It's been so hard lately. People don't realize how difficult it is to figure out your life path when you have so many options. And the social pressures of maintaining friendships and looking put together, it's exhausting. I can imagine, I said sincerely. And I know Mom and Dad have been incredible about helping you through this difficult period. They really have, Emma gushed. I don't know what I'd do without them. They understand that I need support and encouragement to function at my best. How much support are we talking about? I asked casually, as if making conversation, just so I can understand the scope of what good family support looks like. My parents exchanged a quick glance, but Emma was too pleased with the attention to notice the warning. Oh, just the usual stuff. They cover my rent and car payment, give me spending money when I need it, help with emergencies. Dad estimates it's probably around $3,000 a month, but that's just basic living expenses. $3,000 a month? I repeated thoughtfully. That's $36,000 a year. I guess, but it's not like I'm keeping track. Money stuff is boring. I nodded slowly, then reached for the folder I'd placed beside my chair. That's interesting, Emma, because I have been keeping track. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents straightened in their chairs, suddenly alert to the shift in my tone. What do you mean? Mom asked carefully. Instead of answering, I spread the first set of documents across the table: bank records, credit card statements, and a detailed spreadsheet showing 5 years of financial support to Emma. According to these records, you've given Emma $247,000 over the past 5 years, I said calmly. That's not $3,000 a month. That's an average of $4,100 monthly. Dad's face was already flushing red. Manda, where did you get? But here's what's really interesting, I continued, weighing out the second set of documents. During that same 5-year period, I received exactly $0 in financial support, despite repeatedly asking for help with basic necessities. Emma was staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand what you're doing right now. I'm showing you the math, Emma. While you received nearly $250,000 in support, I was told money was tight when I asked for help with my baby's formula. This is inappropriate, Mom said sharply. Family financial matters are private. You're absolutely right, I agreed, pulling out my phone. Let me play you something else that was supposed to be private. I pressed play on the recording from their living room conversation, their own voices filling the space with casual cruelty. Honestly, Robert, I don't know what Manda expected. She knew we couldn't afford to help with baby expenses when Emma needs so much support right now. The girl's got to learn responsibility sometime. Emma's different. She's got that spark, that specialness. Manda's always been more ... practical. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's mouth was hanging open. Dad's face had gone from red to purple, and Mom looked like she'd been slapped. That's illegal, Dad sputtered. You can't record private conversations. Actually, I can, I said, consulting my notes. One-party consent state. Every conversation I was part of is perfectly legal to record. I played another clip, this one of Emma's voice dripping with entitlement. God, finally. I thought she was going to keep begging. Mom, we should just tell her directly that her problems aren't our responsibility. Emma went white. That's not, I didn't mean. Oh, but there's more, I said, spreading out additional documents. Let's talk about Grandma Rose's will. The reaction was immediate and violent. Dad shot to his feet, knocking over his chair. That's enough. Sit down, I said quietly, but with such authority that he actually obeyed. We're going to finish this conversation. I laid out the probate records, the original will, the bank transfers, and the documentation of every dollar that had been stolen from my education fund. Grandma Rose left me $50,000 for education and housing. I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was revealing. You stole all of it and gave it to Emma instead. That's not how it happened, Mom said desperately. We managed that money responsibly. You managed it right into Emma's bank account, I interrupted. Here are the transfer records. Here's Mom's own handwriting labeling expenses education fund while paying for Emma's car, Emma's trips, Emma's credit cards. Emma was now staring at the documents with growing horror, beginning to understand the scope of what had been done in her. Name, but here's my favorite part, I continued, pulling out the final folder. The recordings where you planned the theft. Sarah's voice filled the room through my phone speaker, playing the 9-year-old recording where my parents discussed their intention to steal my inheritance. She's too irresponsible to handle that kind of money. We should use it for Emma's education instead. She'd appreciate it more. What if Manda finds out? She won't. And even if she does, what's she going to do about it? I turned off the recording and looked around the table at their shocked faces. What I'm going to do about it, I said calmly, is this. I handed each of them a legal document. You're being served with papers for inheritance fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conversion. I'm suing you for full restitution plus treble damages, which comes to approximately $220,000. Dad was reading the papers with shaking hands. You can't be serious. I'm also filing criminal complaints for inheritance, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. And here's the best part. I'm releasing all of this evidence publicly. Your church, your neighbors, your coworkers, Emma's friends, everyone is going to know exactly what kind of people you really are. The explosion was immediate. Emma burst into tears. Dad started shouting about ingratitude and legal threats. Mom began a frantic litany of justifications and denials. But I sat perfectly still in the center of the chaos, feeling calmer than I had in years. You ungrateful little bitch, Dad snarled, his mask of respectability finally slipping completely. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me. I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You sold my baby's crib for concert tickets. You stole my inheritance to fund Emma's lifestyle. You let your granddaughter face homelessness while paying for spa weekends. What exactly do you think you've done for me? We raised you, Mom cried. We gave you a home, food, clothes. That's called being a parent, I said coldly. It's not a favor you did me, it's the bare minimum legal requirement. And you used it to justify treating me like a servant while treating Emma like a princess. Emma was now sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know, she kept saying. I didn't know the money was supposed to be yours. Yes, you did, I said quietly, and the certainty in my voice made her look up. Maybe not the specific details, but you knew. You knew you were getting things I wasn't. You knew I was struggling while you lived in luxury. You knew, and you convinced yourself you deserved it more. That's not true. Emma, I have recordings of you saying I should be grateful for basic childhood necessities, while you deserve unlimited adult support. I have recordings of you calling me ungrateful for having needs, while you consider wants to be entitlements. You knew exactly what was happening. Dad was reading through the legal papers, his face growing paler by the page. This will destroy us financially. Good, I said simply. You destroyed me financially my entire life. You stole my opportunities, my security, my daughter's future. Now you get to experience what financial destruction feels like. But we're family, Mom pleaded, as if that word held any meaning after everything they'd done. No, I said, standing up and beginning to clear the table around their frozen forms. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't abandon each other. Family doesn't sacrifice one child for another's comfort. We're genetically related, but we stopped being family the day you chose Emma's concert tickets over your granddaughter's. Crib. Emma was now hyperventilating. What's going to happen to me? I can't live without their help. You're 25 years old, I said matter-of-factly. You're going to learn what the rest of us learned years ago, how to support yourself. Consider it a crash course in the adulthood you've been avoiding. You're destroying our family over money, Dad said, his voice filled with disgust. I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. I'm exposing what was already destroyed. You destroyed this family when you chose theft over fairness, when you chose favoritism over love, when you chose cruelty over kindness. I'm just making sure everyone else can see what you really are. They sat in stunned silence as I finished cleaning up around them, their legal papers scattered across the table like the evidence of their crimes. You need to leave now, I said finally, and don't contact me again unless it's through lawyers. Any attempt to harass me or interfere with my life will be documented and added to the criminal complaint. As they gathered their things and stumbled toward the door, Emma turned back one last time. Manda, please. Can't we work this out as a family? I looked at her, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. This woman who had lived her entire adult life on stolen money, who had accepted luxury while her niece went without, who had convinced herself that her comfort was more important than everyone else's survival. Emma, I said gently, when you spend your first month paying your own rent with money you earned yourself, when you buy your first groceries with your own paycheck, when you face a single real consequence for your choices, then maybe you'll understand what family actually means. Until then, you're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment with Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier, surrounded by the evidence of 9 years of systematic abuse and theft. But for the first time since she'd been born, I felt like I could breathe freely. The war was officially declared, and I had just fired the opening shot that would change everything. The legal summons arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who made sure to hand them the papers personally. I knew this because their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me immediately. Apparently, the sight of a police car in their driveway had been quite the neighborhood spectacle. Mia, I don't know what's happening over there, she said in her gentle accent, but your mama looked like she was going to faint when that officer left. The criminal complaint filed simultaneously sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed world. Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office had opened an investigation into inheritance fraud, and my parents were facing the very real possibility of criminal charges that could result in jail time. But the social consequences moved even faster than the legal ones that Sarah had strategically released. Key evidence to their church leadership, their neighborhood association, and their professional networks. The recordings of them dismissing their granddaughter's needs while funding spa weekends hit their social circle like a bomb. The documentation of inheritance theft destroyed their reputation as upstanding community members. My father's position on the church board was suspended pending resolution of legal matters. My mother was quietly removed from her volunteer leadership roles at 2 different charities. Their country club membership was under review. The financial pressure was immediate and devastating. Sarah had successfully filed for asset freezing, which meant they couldn't sell property, transfer large sums of money, or make any significant financial moves without court approval. The credit cards they'd been using to fund Emma's lifestyle were frozen pending investigation. Emma's world collapsed in a matter of days. The apartment they'd been paying for. The landlord wanted either immediate payment or she had to move out. The car payments? Without their financial backing, repossession was inevitable. The credit cards that had funded her shopping sprees and social life, all canceled when the bank learned that they were under criminal investigation. I learned about Emma's breakdown through mutual acquaintances on social media. Her Instagram account, once filled with designer outfits and expensive experiences, went silent. Then came a series of increasingly desperate posts about unfair attacks on my family and legal harassment over misunderstandings. But the most revealing post came 3 weeks after the dinner. Confrontation. Sometimes people you trust turn out to be vindictive and cruel. I'm learning who my real friends are during this difficult time. Pray for my family as we deal with false accusations and betrayal. False accusations, despite having heard the recordings, seen the financial documents, and been presented with irrefutable evidence of theft. She was still clinging to the narrative that she was the victim. The comments on that post were illuminating. Some of her friends offered support, but others began asking uncomfortable questions. What accusations? What happened? Are you okay? When those friends started seeing the evidence that was now circulating through their social network, the support quickly dried up. It's hard to maintain sympathy for someone when you learn they've been living in luxury off money stolen from their struggling sister's inheritance. My parents attempted damage control, but their efforts only made things worse. Dad hired an expensive attorney who immediately advised him to stop talking to anyone about the case. Mom tried to salvage their social standing by telling carefully edited versions of events to their closest friends. But Sarah had been brilliant in her evidence release strategy. She'd given just enough information to key community leaders to ensure the truth would spread organically, making any attempted cover-up look like additional deception. The most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source, my parents' own financial advisor. When he learned about the inheritance fraud during the asset investigation, he immediately distanced himself from their accounts and reported their activities to his firm's compliance department. Mrs. Andrews, he apparently told my mother during their final meeting, I cannot continue to provide financial services to clients who are under investigation for inheritance fraud. This firm's reputation depends on our association with ethical clients. Their financial life began unraveling rapidly. Banks pulled credit lines, investment advisors refused to work with them, and their mortgage company began asking uncomfortable questions about the source of their recent financial activities. But the cruelest consequence was the isolation. One by one, their friends and social acquaintances began avoiding them. Church members who had once sought their advice now whispered when they passed. Neighbors who had been friendly for decades suddenly found reasons to avoid conversation. The country club where they'd been members for 15 years asked them to voluntarily resign their membership. To avoid the unpleasantness of a formal review process, Emma tried desperately to find someone to blame other than herself. She called mutual friends, family members, anyone who would listen, spinning elaborate stories about my supposed greed and vindictiveness. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the recordings too damaging, the theft too well documented. 3 weeks after the confrontation dinner, she showed up at my apartment at midnight, clearly having been drinking, mascara streaked down her face, wearing clothes that looked like she'd been sleeping in them. Manda, please, she begged through my closed door. You have to stop this. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't know how to live like this. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in, looking at this woman who had once seemed so powerful and now appeared completely broken. Emma, you're 25 years old. Millions of people your age live independently without their parents funding their entire existence. But I don't know how. I've never had to pay rent or bills or worry about money. I don't even know how much things cost. The helplessness in her voice was real, but so was the entitlement underlying it. Even now, facing homelessness, she was framing her situation as something that was happening to her rather than something that was the natural consequence of living off stolen money for years. That's not my responsibility to fix, I said quietly. You spent years living off money that was stolen from me. You participated in my financial destruction while enjoying benefits you knew you hadn't earned. The fact that you're now experiencing consequences doesn't make you the victim. I'll pay it back, she said desperately. I'll get a job, I'll work, I'll do whatever it takes. With what skills, Emma? What job experience do you have? What education did you complete with your own money rather than my stolen inheritance? The questions hung in the air like accusations because we both knew the answers. Her entire adult life had been built on a foundation of theft, and now that foundation was crumbling. Please, she whispered, I'm your sister. No, I said, beginning to close the door. A sister wouldn't have lived in luxury while my baby slept in a drawer. A sister wouldn't have accepted stolen money while I faced eviction. A sister wouldn't have convinced our parents that her wants were more important than my daughter's needs. As I closed the door, I heard her sobbing in the hallway, and for a moment I felt something that might have been pity. But then I remembered the recordings of her calling me ungrateful, the images of her posting spa photos while Lily went hungry, the casual cruelty with which she dismissed my struggles. Some consequences are earned, and some people have to learn the hard way that actions have prices. Emma's desperate text messages started arriving at all hours, a digital chronicle of someone discovering what adult responsibility actually meant. The screenshots I collected became their own form of documentation, showing the complete collapse of someone who had never faced real consequences. Manda, please call me back. The apartment manager says I have to be out by Friday and I don't know where to go. Can't we work something out? The car got repossessed this morning. I was at work. Yes, I got a job at a coffee shop, and when I came out, it was gone. How am I supposed to get to work now? I applied for government assistance, and they want to see pay stubs and bank statements. I've never had to do this before. Everything is so complicated when you don't have help. I'm staying on Sarah's couch, friend from college, but she says I can only stay 2 more days. I looked at apartments, but they want first month, last month, and security deposit. How do people afford that? The messages revealed something I'd never seen before. Emma experiencing the same financial terror that had defined my entire adult life. The panic of not knowing where rent money would come from. The humiliation of asking friends for a temporary shelter. The overwhelming complexity of navigating adult systems without a safety net. But even in her desperation, the entitlement remained. This is so unfair. I never asked to be put in this position. All I did was accept help from my parents. How was I supposed to know where the money came from? I called Aunt Sarah to ask for help, and she told me I needed to learn accountability. Why is everyone being so cruel? I'm the victim here too. I don't understand why you're punishing me for Mom and Dad's mistakes. I didn't steal anything. I was just their daughter. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Even faced with homelessness and the complete collapse of her comfortable life, Emma still couldn't accept that she had been an active participant in maintaining the system that had robbed me for years. Her social media presence became a study in someone grappling with reality for the first time. The designer outfit photos stopped abruptly, replaced by increasingly desperate attempts to maintain her image. Taking a break from social media to focus on new opportunities. #growth, #independence. Learning so much about myself during this challenging time. #blessed, #strong. Sometimes life forces you to discover who you really are. Hashtag journey, hashtag finding myself. But her friends weren't buying the inspirational reframing. The comments grew fewer and more skeptical as word spread about the inheritance fraud case. People who had envied her lifestyle began to understand it had been built on theft. The coffee shop job she'd mentioned lasted exactly 3 weeks. According to her increasingly frantic messages, she'd been fired for chronic lateness, calling in sick too often, and attitude problems with management. They expect you to be there at 6 a.m. every single day, even when you're tired or don't feel good. And the manager was so rude when I explained that I'm going through a difficult time and need flexibility. The woman who had spent years criticizing my work ethic and calling ungrateful couldn't handle the basic requirements of minimum wage employment, thought her housing situation became increasingly precarious. After burning through the couches of several friends who grew tired of her complaints and demands for emotional support, she ended up in a weekly rate motel that consumed most of her final savings. This place is disgusting and the people are scary. I can't believe this is my life now. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this. How did everything go so wrong so fast? The answer was simple, though she still couldn't see it. Everything had gone wrong the moment our parents chose to steal my inheritance to fund her lifestyle. The comfortable life she'd been living was always temporary, always built on a foundation of lies and theft. But the messages that revealed the most about her character came when she tried to manipulate sympathy from extended family members. Manda is destroying our family over money. She's so greedy that she'd rather see her own sister homeless than forgive a simple misunderstanding. I'm living in a motel because my sister decided to be vindictive about ancient history. All I ever did was trust our parents. She recorded private family conversations and is using them to hurt people who love her. I don't understand how someone can be so cruel. When those relatives contacted me for clarification, I simply sent them the recordings of Emma calling me ungrateful, the financial records showing her $250,000 lifestyle funded by my stolen inheritance, and the documentation of her role in convincing our parents to be firmer. With me, the sympathy dried up quickly. The most telling message came after she'd been living in the motel for 2 months. When the reality of supporting herself had finally begun to sink in, I got hired at a retail store, but the pay is only $12 an hour. Do you know how long I'd have to work to afford a decent apartment? This is impossible. I don't understand how people live like this. She didn't understand how people live like this because she'd spent her entire adult life living off money stolen from someone who had been living exactly like this. She'd accepted luxury while her sister struggled with exactly the same impossible math. She was now discovering. Her final message in the series came 3 months after the confrontation dinner. I'm moving in with a roommate I found on Craigslist. Her name is Janet, and she's 45 and works 2 jobs. The apartment is tiny and I have to share a bathroom. I never thought my life would turn out like this. But buried in that message was something I hadn't expected, a hint of growth. I called the employee assistance program at work, and they're helping me sign up for night classes at the community college. I think I want to study business management, maybe accounting. I need to understand how money works if I'm going to make it on my own. For the first time in her life, Emma was talking about earning something rather than receiving it, about building skills rather than relying on others' generosity, about taking responsibility for her future rather than expecting it to be provided. It was the beginning of the woman she might have become if our parents had ever required her to grow up. But as I read that message, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, no joy in her newfound poverty. What I felt was the quiet certainty that justice had been served, not through my cruelty, but through the simple removal of stolen advantages. Emma wasn't being punished. She was finally experiencing the same reality that millions of people her age navigated every day. The same reality I'd been forced to navigate while supporting her lifestyle with my stolen inheritance. For the first time in her life, She was living within her own means instead of mine. The settlement check arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 18 months after the confrontation dinner, delivered by certified mail in an envelope that felt heavier than its contents suggested. $237,000, the full amount of my stolen inheritance plus compound interest, legal fees, and additional damages for emotional distress. I stared at the check for a long time, sitting in my kitchen with Lily playing on the floor in her new playpen, trying to process the magnitude of what this money represented. It wasn't just financial security, it was validation that what had happened to me was real, wrong, and legally actionable. Sarah had negotiated a settlement that avoided the criminal trial, but not without consequences for my parents. They'd been forced to liquidate their retirement investments, take out a second mortgage on their house, and sell their country club membership to raise the money. Their comfortable retirement was gone, replaced by financial stress that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Justice has a cost, Sarah had explained during our final meeting. They spent decades building wealth while stealing yours. Now they get to spend their remaining years rebuilding what they lost through their own criminal behavior. But the money was only part of the healing. The real transformation had been internal, gradual, built through months of therapy and the slowly growing certainty that I deserved better than the scraps my family had offered. Dr. Martinez, a therapist Sarah had recommended, had helped me understand that the abuse I'd suffered wasn't just financial, it was psychological, designed to make me believe I was inherently less valuable than Emma. The recordings I'd made weren't just evidence of theft. They were documentation of systematic emotional abuse that had shaped my entire sense of self-worth. Trauma from family betrayal is particularly insidious, she'd explained during one of our sessions. When the people who are supposed to protect and nurture you instead exploit and dismiss you, it damages your ability to trust your own perceptions of reality. That damage had taken months to repair. Learning to believe that my needs were legitimate, that my struggles were real, that I deserved support rather than criticism, it had been harder than any legal battle, but Lily had been my anchor throughout the process. Every milestone she reached, every smile, every small achievement reminded me why the fight had been necessary. She would grow up in a world where theft had consequences, where favoritism was challenged, where the responsible person wasn't automatically sacrificed for the comfortable person's benefit. The first thing I did with the settlement money was secure proper housing for us. Not a luxury apartment, but a solid 2-bedroom place in a safe neighborhood with good schools and a real nursery for Lily. When I assembled her new crib, bought with money that had always belonged to us, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with furniture and everything to do with justice. The second thing I did was establish education funds for Lily that couldn't be touched by anyone but her. Whatever mistakes I made as a parent, she would never face the choice between education and debt because someone had stolen her opportunities. But perhaps the most important thing the settlement provided was choice. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions based on what was best for my daughter and me, rather than what I could afford or what others might approve of. I chose to go back to school, using part of the money to earn the business degree I'd always wanted, not because I had to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted to understand finance and law well enough to never be vulnerable to theft again. Chose to maintain no contact with my parents, despite their increasingly desperate attempts at reconciliation once the money was paid. Their apologies rang hollow because they were motivated by consequences, rather than genuine remorse for the harm they'd caused. Most surprisingly, I chose to respond when Emma reached out after 6 months of silence. Her email was different from the desperate text messages I'd received during her initial crisis. The tone was subdued, thoughtful, lacking the entitlement that had characterized all our previous interactions. "Manda," she wrote, "I don't expect you to forgive me or want a relationship with me. I understand why you don't, but I needed you to know that I'm finally starting to understand what you went through, and I'm ashamed of my part in it. She described the past year of working multiple jobs, living in shared housing, learning to budget and save and make choices between necessities. I never understood what working for everything you have actually meant until I had to do it myself. But what struck me most was this paragraph. I kept expecting someone to save me the way I'd always been saved before. It took months to realize that the saving had to come from me, and that all those years of being saved had actually made me weaker, not stronger. She wasn't asking for money or help or reconciliation. She was simply acknowledging the reality. I've lived with my entire life that security comes from your own efforts, not from other people's generosity. I didn't respond to the email, but I kept it, not out of any desire to rebuild our relationship, but as evidence that people could change when they were finally required to face consequences for their choices. The criminal charges against my parents were ultimately dropped as part of the settlement agreement, but the public record remained. Their names would forever be associated with inheritance fraud in our community. Their reputation, so carefully constructed over decades of charitable work and community involvement, was permanently destroyed. That social consequence seemed to hurt them more than the financial one. Money could be rebuilt over time, but trust, once broken through documented betrayal, was nearly impossible to restore. The healing wasn't linear or complete. Some days I still felt the old anger, the deep hurt of realizing that the people who should have protected me had instead exploited me. Some days I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if there had been another way to seek justice that wouldn't have destroyed relationships permanently. But then I would look at Lily, thriving in her secure environment, never having to worry about having her basic needs dismissed because someone else's wants took priority. And I knew I'd made the right choice. The settlement money wouldn't last forever, but the precedent would. In our family, theft now had consequences. Favoritism was challenged. The responsible person was protected rather than exploited. Dr. Martinez had said something during our final session that stayed with me. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't that bad. Healing is about reclaiming your power and using it to build the life you and your daughter deserve. As I looked around our new apartment, Lily's bedroom with its proper crib and changing table, the kitchen where I didn't have to choose between groceries and bills, the living room where we could relax without the constant stress of financial crisis, I realized that healing looked exactly like security. Justice hadn't just been about recovering stolen money. It had been about recovering my sense of self-worth, my daughter's future, and our right to live without constantly justifying our basic needs to people who had never questioned their own entitlement to luxury. Lily's first word wasn't mama or dada, it was up, spoken clearly as she raised her arms from her beautiful new crib, asking to be lifted into a world that finally felt secure. I picked her up that morning, looking around the nursery I'd created with money that had always belonged to us, and felt something I'd never experienced before. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you fought for what matters and won. The crib was perfect. Solid oak with intricate heart carvings, exactly like the one my parents had sold for Emma's concert tickets 2 years earlier, but better. This one was bought with recovered inheritance money, assembled in a home we owned rather than rented, placed in a room designed around love rather than making do. Everything about our life had changed. But the most important transformation had been internal. I no longer woke up every morning wondering how I'd afford the day's necessities. I no longer felt the crushing weight of being responsible for everything while receiving help with nothing. I no longer questioned whether my needs were legitimate or my struggles were real. The business degree I'd completed the previous spring had led to a position with a nonprofit that helped families navigate legal and financial crises work that felt like turning my own trauma into something useful for others. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now helping other people fight the kinds of battles I'd been forced to wage alone, taught my supervisor. Maria had known my story from the beginning and had hired me specifically because of my experience with family financial abuse. You understand what our clients are going through in ways someone who's only studied it academically never could. She told me during my interview she was right. When I sat across from women who'd been financially manipulated by family members, who'd been told they were ungrateful for having needs, who'd been systematically excluded from opportunities while watching others receive unearned advantages, I could offer something beyond professional sympathy. I could offer the hard one. Knowledge that fighting back was possible and justice was achievable. The work was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Every case I helped resolve, every family whose stolen inheritance I helped recover, every woman I helped understand that emotional manipulation disguised as love was still abuse. It all felt like extending the justice I'd found for myself, but the most profound healing came from watching Lily grow up in an environment where her needs mattered, where fairness was a given rather than something to hope for, where the responsible choice was supported rather than punished. At 18 months old, she was thriving in ways that went beyond physical health. She was confident, curious, secure in the knowledge that when she needed something, it would be provided not grudgingly or conditionally, but as a matter of course. I'd established trust funds for her education and housing that couldn't be touched by anyone else, with Sarah serving as the trustee to ensure the mistakes of previous generations couldn't be repeated. Lily would never face the choice between college and debt because someone had stolen her opportunities. But beyond the financial security, I was raising her with values my family had never modeled. That fairness matters, that everyone deserves basic respect, that being responsible doesn't mean being exploited, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. The hardest part of our new life was the loneliness. Cutting ties with my parents and Emma had been necessary for our well-being, but it had left us without extended family. Some days I missed the idea of grandparents for Lily, even though the reality of my parents had been so toxic, but we'd built our own chosen family. Sarah had become the loving Aunt Lily deserved. Mrs. Chun from our old apartment building had remained a surrogate grandmother who genuinely cared about Lily's well-being, and the community I'd found through work and school had provided the support network my biological family had never offered. Dr. Martinez had warned me that there might always be moments of doubt, times when I wondered if I'd been too harsh or if there had been another way to handle the situation that wouldn't have required such complete severance. Those moments still came, usually triggered by seeing other families who seemed to navigate conflicts without such dramatic consequences. But they passed quickly now, especially when I remembered the recordings of my parents dismissing Lily's needs while funding spa weekends, or when I thought about the systematic theft that had shaped my entire adult life. Some choices are complicated, but some are simple. You protect your child from the people who would exploit her, even if those people happen to be family. The anniversary of the confrontation dinner had passed quietly last month, marked only by my private reflection on how much had changed. 2 years ago, I'd been facing eviction while my sister posted photos from luxury vacations funded by my stolen inheritance. Now I was a homeowner with a college degree, meaningful work, and the security to make choices based on what was best for my daughter rather than what I could afford. Emma had continued to occasionally send updates, brief, respectful emails that documented her ongoing efforts to build an independent life. She'd completed her business management program, found steady work with a small accounting firm, and was slowly building the kind of self-reliance she'd never learned during her years of being supported by stolen money. I'd never responded to those emails, but I'd kept them as evidence that people could change when they were finally required to face consequences. Her transformation didn't repair the damage she'd caused or justify the years of abuse she'd participated in. But it proved that accountability, even when imposed rather than chosen, could lead to growth. As I put Lily down for her afternoon nap, in the beautiful nursery that represented so much more than furniture, I thought about the letter I'd written to her during the darkest days of our crisis, the one explaining why I was about to turn our family upside down for the sake of justice. She was still too young to understand the story, but someday she would read that letter and know that when her mother's back was against the wall, when basic needs were dismissed while others lived in luxury, when theft was disguised as family love, I had chosen to fight rather than accept injustice. Someday she would understand that the security she'd always known, the fairness she'd always experienced, the confidence she'd always felt, it had all been fought for and won in the months before. She was old enough to remember Dot, and someday, if she ever faced her own moments of injustice, she would know that fighting back was possible, that standing up for what's right was worth the cost, and that some things, dignity, truth, her daughters, future, were worth any sacrifice to protect. The crib where she slept so peacefully was more than just furniture. It was a symbol of justice served, love protected, and a future reclaimed from the people who had tried to steal it. As I watched her chest rise and fall in the steady rhythm of innocent sleep, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you've built something good from something broken, something true from something false, something yours from something stolen. We were home, finally and completely home, in a life that belonged entirely to us.